Backyard Farmer is a co-production of NET Television and Nebraska Extension. Tonight on Backyard Farmer, we'll be taking a stroll around a garden center looking for trees that stand up to diseases. We'll also check out the turf at Hawks Field. That's all coming up next, right here on Backyard Farmer.
Backyard Farmer. I'm Kim Todd, and I'll be your host for the next hour of answering your gardening questions. Joining me on the panel tonight, we have experts from Nebraska Extension. We have Jim Kalish answering our insect questions.
Mid-April welcome to all of you.
We have Bill Kreuzer answering turf and weed questions.
Hello, everybody.
We have Lauren Giesler, rots and spots.
Always great to be here, Kim.
And our own Hall County Extension educator, Elizabeth Killinger, answering all those horticulture questions.
Hello.
You know, if you have a gardening question, you can speak to one of our phone volunteers by dialing 402-1212 if you live in Lincoln. Toll-free number is 1-800-676-5446. We also accept your email questions and pictures for future shows. That address is byf@unl.edu. When you send us an email, please tell us as much information as you can, including at least which part of the state you live in. Don't forget to like us on Facebook, follow our tweets on Twitter, as well as our video features on YouTube. Before we get to questions, let's take a look at samples, and that is just cool.
It's marvelous.
Marvelous.
I just wanted to show everyone here what a bald-faced hornet nest looks like. And in Nebraska, it's not as big as in Missouri, right, Lauren?
They get a little larger.
But they're an aerial nest, so they're exposed and built in dense shrubbery and up in trees and the like. And of course, they're a larger member of that yellow jacket family. So Bill has been so good to show a picture there so that you can all see what they look like. And this time of year, you're going to have, bald-faced hornet, for one thing, is not distributed across Nebraska. It's mainly eastern or southeastern Nebraska, down by the Missouri River, and that's unfortunate. I wish we had more of it, but anyway, but this is just a reminder that if you ever have any issues or had issues with yellow jackets, whether in open shrubs or paper wasps under the eaves of the house, maybe in an electrical box or a grill or something like that, this is the time of year just to be looking out and watching the yellow jackets and the paper wasps and the hornets in your landscape, because right now the queens are coming out and they're looking for places to set up a nest. And of course, some of these nests will be probably close to a door, window, or where there's some activity of children or whatever. So when you see these wasps that are flying around looking to set up a nest, don't worry about it at that time. They're not going to be threatening. But later on, if you see the establishment of a small nest, that's the best time to take care of it. Just take a wallop at it with a broomstick or whatever, or hose it down or something, and then hopefully you'll discourage those wasp-founding queens from nesting where you don't want them to be, and then they'll go somewhere else. And I'd call that a great agreement, because they're beneficial insects, and so it's nice to have them in the landscape, but not too close to the home or to where they pose some kind of safety danger. So as you see them, if it's a small nest, get it while it's small, knock it out, that queen will go somewhere else.
Awesome. Thanks, Jim. Those are very cool. All right, Bill, we have certified blue tag.
Yep. So, we've been getting asked a lot lately, when can I seed my lawn? It looks bad from the winter, and I've been told to wait because the soils are cold. Well, now is the time. The soils in the state are getting warm, and so we're looking to get some grass seed. And it's really, really important for all our grass to make sure we have good seed. And so I'm looking to reseed my lawn right now. I'm hoping to highlight that on Backyard Farmer this coming year and the challenges we can have seeding in the spring. But first thing I did today was went out and I bought some good certified tall fescue seed. I have a label here telling me how much material is in the seed, how much weed seed there is, and there's none. And this seed is good seed again. And also certified. So I have the blue tag here. This is Oregon. It's pretty typical. You'll see a blue tag certifying that this is certified seed, which means they know exactly where it came from, who its parents are. And so if we're going to seed our lawn, we need to make sure we have good seed, clean of any kind of noxious weeds. And that's the good first step to a weed-free and disease-healthy lawn.
Excellent. Thanks, Bill. Okay, Lauren, disease time.
All right, well, and I really don't have a disease tonight because Amy talked about cedar apple rust, and I brought along cedar apple rust. So I brought along apple that they can just take a picture of. You can see some nice pink blooms there. But just, which is not normal of me, I'd usually bring something that was rotting or decayed or had spots. But this is just to emphasize the need that right now, you know, if you have not sprayed your apple trees and you're trying to manage diseases, this would be the time to do it. In fact, even before now. So I would, those galls are starting to swell, and you're going to see spore release here really soon. And so you're going to want to make those applications of a fungicide. If you're just establishing a fruit tree, you can use some products that would not be for fruit-bearing trees like propiconazole that have longer residual activity and will do a little better job. If this is an established tree and you're wanting to harvest fruit from it, you're going to want to be careful and make sure that you're using a product that you can harvest the fruit. So most of our backyard garden center fruit tree sprays, if you're on a fruit tree spray program, they'll have some sort of a contact fungicide many times that will need repeated application, maybe even every 10 days. So just, you know, read the labels and make sure you're on the right track with that.
Excellent. Thanks, Lauren. All right, Elizabeth, America's favorite fruit.
Yes, America's favorite fruit. And a lot of people out there, they started their own seeds inside. They have these little tiny plugs. They got to a good size, and we want to start bumping them up into the next size container. It's not quite time to put our tomatoes out in the garden yet. It's still a little cold. We need to hold off on it. But if we did plant them, we need to make sure that we either transplant them into a bigger cell pack like this, or if we put multiple seeds in here, then we need to go ahead and cut off some of the extra ones so we have a good seedling that continues to grow. We also want to watch these cell packs to make sure that they don't get too root bound. And then if they start to become too root bound, then we can bump them up to the next size, or hopefully by then we can actually put them out in the garden. Watch out so they don't get too leggy on you, and that just means that there's not enough sunlight. Tomatoes, as long as they're not grafted, you can actually put some of this stem deep down in the ground. So let's say you didn't have enough sunlight, they got too leggy, and you can actually put this part in the ground as long as you take these lower leaves off, and it'll actually put roots on that stem there. So there's a way to save your tomatoes in case they got too tall on you or they didn't get quite enough sunlight, and you can still salvage them.
Excellent. Thank you, Elizabeth. All right, Jim, you get the first picture question. This is a viewer who is south of David City. And she says her husband was splitting wood and found this guy and wants to know what it is.
Well, in reality, this beetle is just amazingly brilliant black and yellow in color. And this is called a painted hickory borer. And that doesn't mean that it's restricted to hickory as a boring insect. There's a number of hardwood species that it will infest. But it's one that comes out in the springtime. So it's been in that tree. They usually don't attack trees that are healthy. But it's been in that tree that was converted to firewood in the course of dealing with the firewood. Then they show up and then they pupate, in the early spring and then come out as adults. So there's one that's very much like it. That's the locust borer that you see in the autumn, and it's often found on goldenrod. So they look a lot alike. Painted hickory borer in the springtime, and locust borer in the August, September, fall time.
And just enjoy, or
there's
smash
really,
him with the brick?
yeah. I mean. For them, yeah, just let them go and do their thing. They pose no threat whatsoever.
Okay, all right, thanks. Okay, Bill, your first picture is from an Omaha viewer, and we get this a lot. This is, how do they get grass out of their iris beds?
Yep, so this is something even kind of new to me because I'm a turf grass guy, so I'm just thinking about keeping weeds out of my grass. And so herbicide you can use would be Grass Be Gone. If it's a tall fescue, you could probably try to pull it out because it doesn't have the rhizomes like a bluegrass did. That's probably bluegrass though, and it's rhizome. So if you pull it, it's going to continue to grow back, and so it's going to be a problem. So you could do something like that Grass Be Gone to clean that up.
All right, and just kind of keep after it.
Yeah, it's just going to be repeat applications and work on it.
All right, thank you, Bill. All right, Lauren, your first question is from Columbus. This viewer found this growing on an ash stump, and it's nice of them to put in a tape measure so we can see exactly how big that thing is. They say the texture is stiff to brittle.
Yeah, and this is one of many different fungi that will colonize oftentimes just dead wood or a stump like this. Depending on the situation and what they're wanting to do, it's not something that's going to be poisonous, so I'm not worried about that in the landscape if they're worried about, an animal or something eating it. But I would, if you want to just remove it, you can. It's breaking down that stump, so you can leave it. I think they're really pretty, so I would just leave it there and put some flowers around it and let it do its job.
All right, Lauren. Elizabeth, we have a viewer who is south of Cortland, and they have some crabapple trees that got debarked in a 2014 hailstorm. He says they're beginning to bud, but his concern is whether they will actually survive, long term. Wonders if he should baby them along. They're only 2 years in the landscape.
That is some severe damage for that plant to have to overcome. Anytime you remove that bark and the tissue behind the bark, that's where all the nutrient and the water movement happens. So you saw those bare spots on there. That's the areas that it's not going to be able to move water and nutrients. So unfortunately, our best recommendation would be to potentially start over. Because they're 2 years in the landscape, you can get another crabapple started in the same spot or a similar spot, and you can get it going, and it'll far surpass the one that you left in with time. So, gonna have to probably remove it.
And hail never strikes twice in the same place.
I think that's lightning, but
And you have to knock on wood either way. Well, nothing is more American than taking in a ball game at the park. Here in Lincoln, we follow the Husker baseball team at Hawks Field at Haymarket Park. It's a wonderful stadium with an immaculate field of green grass. Our first feature tonight takes a look at the grounds crew and what they have to do to help those Huskers on to victory on the field.
The grass on the field is 100% Kentucky bluegrass with a little bit of perennial ryegrass mixed in some of the wear areas. But I try to keep bluegrass mainly in the fields. In our landscape, everything along the complex fence is irrigated, and we have a turf-type tall fescue planted around there. Everything else is actually not irrigated around the complex, and we've added some native plants, I guess, because they're a little bit more drought tolerant and less maintenance involved. Hawks Field, I believe in 2003, and also I received it in 2007, has won a College Field of the Year. That is basically selected by a panel of sports turf managers that decide that award and select the best field.
Headed home is Schuyler, to third is Dillday. Nebraska takes a 1-0.
That goes a long way, just a little thank you by those players, and it's the last thing we want to do is ever have the game affected by a bad bounce or something that we could have prevented. So that's why, like I said, just paying attention to details.
Nebraska continues its domination in the early portion of the season at home.
After the game is over, we clean up all the edges, because there's clay that's kind of broke out from the players' cleats. We repair the mounds at home plates and all the bullpens. Basically, our goal is at the end of the night is to walk away here having it absolutely perfect, ready to play the next day, and then let them come in and chew it all up again. A lot of time is sacrificed as far as the amount of work in here. I mean, it could almost make it a really easy job, just mow and water and get ready for the game, but the attention and details that is spent on these fields is what really separates us from the rest, I believe. I focus almost on all the little tiny spots that are wore out and that things that I wish I could fix, but I can't right away. And the fans, they don't see that at all. They, like I said, they just kind of see the big picture, and they're really impressed by it, and they always give us compliments. And especially this time of year when it's hard to get the grass growing, and so we take pride on just in general the color of the grass, and, how much work it actually takes, and behind the scenes work, because we spend a lot of hours before any fan or player actually sees the field. We're usually kind of the one of the first people here and usually one of the last people to leave. This is those little things that really make it pop that, you know, when you look at the field, it makes a big difference.
Hawks Field is a great place to watch a game, and as we've just seen, there's really no better field crew to help keep that grass green. And I can't imagine playing on a field that was crummy in comparison. They must have a lot of fun with that. All right, Jim, we had a discussion about whether this belongs to you or not, and you've decided it does.
Yes, it can.
And this is asparagus spears with purplish stripes kind of going up the base of the stem and then a curly top, and this is rural Lancaster County.
Okay, so the stripes are not my department necessarily, but curled tops on spears of asparagus can be caused by asparagus beetle feeding. And at that time, it's even before they lay eggs, they're just getting energy and chewing those very tender, succulent tips. And so, of course, the spear is still growing and elongating, and of course, that's going to cause an aberration, and you're going to end up with the cricking going on. So, but I would say that's a warning to expect to see asparagus beetles. It'd be nice to try to get rid of them. That with something. Probably you have to use insecticide if it's bad, but that would last just a day or two, like a pyrethrins type knockdown spray or something like that, and that would help. And then watch out for those they aren't very tasty eggs that are on the spears, the little blacky eggs, and so at that point it's almost too late. So you have to pick them off or something if you want to salvage it. That those eggs are not very tasty.
Oh, all right, you speak from experience on that one.
And then, did you have anything on the striations or whatever in the spears?
No,
Okay.
it's just the damage caused by it when it comes up, and there's not a whole lot
Nothing
you can do about it.
All right. Okay, Bill, this is a Philly, Nebraska viewer.
Okay.
They have a weed that nobody has been able to identify, but apparently a lot of people have seen it taking over bare spots in the lawn. It starts out soft, and then it ends up being a little bit less soft with age.
We think it's a knotweed, like a prostate knotweed. And it's generally a weed that you see in areas that are infertile and compacted. And so, looking at a weed is really great because you can figure out what weed it is and then what is it telling you about your lawn. And so if you're looking at a weed like that, it's probably bad soil management. We need to try to aerate, we need to fertilize, and that will help really keep that weed out. If you look for chemical controls, that's a Band-Aid, and it can be something like dicamba, like a try a three-way product or something with triclopyr that will help to take care of it. But ultimately, make sure we're doing the cultural stuff first.
All right, thank you, Bill. Lauren, you get this one, even though they think it was an insect question. This is an Omaha viewer. The tree is actually probably a Crimson King maple. The wound is on the southwest side of the tree, and this is kind of the cool picture. This is why you got it with all that fungi, and then there's a bitty little, looks like the larva of a boar, Jim.
It is, yeah.
Yep. So what do you think, Lauren?
So, well, I can go on the mushroom identification, and I don't know if it's got a borer larva, if Jim says that's the
Not
tree's-
important in this case.
Okay. Probably stressed. I don't know, that large injury like that, if we had a lightning strike or something, I'm not sure what, but something has damaged that portion to the point that you've got some wood decay fungi in there. And this one in the picture is actually I don't recommend eating any fungi that you collect in the wild unless you're an expert, but this looks to be like an auricularia fungus, which is common in many of our softer wood decays that we'll see. So real similar to the one you see in the hot and sour soup at the Chinese restaurant.
And not a good
But
sign
no
for the
evidence
tree.
of a disease, but just evidence that you have a significant amount of damage to the point that you're getting rot. So I can't tell what the cause was from that, but just like the boar probably, it's just there because the tree's stressed and
Correct,
decaying.
yeah.
Time for a new tree.
Probably.
All right, thank you. Elizabeth, this viewer has blue shag pine, which is a white pine, and they are seeing this injury and wondering, is this disease-based? What do we have going on here?
The white pines are really susceptible to winter desiccation or winter drying. And so we saw a lot of it last winter with some of the mature white pines, the bigger ones. This one still has some winter desiccation. It really doesn't like the reflected heat or the reflected light from those different surfaces. And so unfortunately, you can wait and see if it comes out of it, but I don't think it probably will. So in order to prevent winter desiccation, we like to recommend that you apply water anytime airtime temperatures are above 40 degrees. And you want to make sure you apply enough water and allow it to soak in before we drop below freezing. But for right now, it's just going to be a waiting game if it pops back out of that.
All right.
And they may want to take a look inside that canopy a little bit because they had some bright green and then dark. There may be some sort of physical injury inside there on some of those branches where they got just large dead areas too. So I'd take a closer look at inside there maybe too, be another recommendation.
Good point. Well, starting the season earlier in the year has given us a chance to help you get a head start on some of the disease problems that are common to trees. For this week's Green and Growing tip, Amy Timmerman talks about cedar apple rust and how you can keep it off your apple trees.
This is the time of year we need to start walking out in our landscape and taking a look to see where our plants are at growing wise. With the wonderful rain that we received in the last week or so, cedar apple rust galls on our pine trees or on our cedar trees are starting to sporulate. So that's an indication that we need to start putting on those preventive fungicide treatments on our crab apples, and all the other ornamental apples. Best time to do that, we need to walk out and see if we're seeing those cedar apple rust galls starting to sporulate, those tendrils coming out. We also need to start looking to see if our apples are starting to leaf out. As those buds are starting to emerge and the leaves are starting to come out, that is the perfect time to make those fungicide applications to prevent our foliage from being infected by cedar apple rust and causing major infections that we are worried about later on during the growing season. Take a look at our local neb guides to determine which fungicides are going to be the best for you. Also, depending on what the weather is, we may need to do a repeated application only if it continues to rain. If we get dry, one application should be enough to protect your apples for the remainder of the growing season.
So right now is a great time to get those apple trees sprayed and protected for the rest of the season. With the moist weather we've been having, those orange galls are going to be out in full force, so do take the time to spray those trees soon, and I'm certain we'll be getting some more calls about that one.
Nice thing about those orange galls is that is usually an indicator that morel season is upon us. So
Ooh, there we go.
I would go looking.
All right, Jim, you get the first question here. And this is from a viewer who has a question about a little tiny insect, a little bit bigger than a pinhead, thousands of them on the children's swing set. They fly. They want to know what they could do about them. She sent a picture, but we couldn't, it was a little blurry, so we couldn't really use it.
So they fly very small and whitish. I was thinking possibly, the only thing that I can think of this time of year when we have ample moisture and the like, that they could be something like gnats, you know, what we call common gnats that come from lakes or ponds nearby. They often will arise at that time and they'll just mass together, and of course they mate and disperse and the like. It's not anything that I think will be long term. I mean, it's got probably even by now, I'm sure it's probably dissipated a bit, but it'd have to be something like a gnat, common midge or whatever, gnat.
All right, thank you, Jim. Bill, this is a viewer who has a maple, and on the north side of that maple tree, they're saying the turf is already pretty light in color. The area is about 5 feet in diameter. It gets larger as the season goes on. The tree gets curled leaves, and then the leaves turn brown. So it's sort of a turf question. They don't want to lose the turf. It's a tree question. They don't want to lose the tree. Is this a soil issue or what?
If they're seeing a yellow already, that could, I don't know. I don't know the tree part. It could be a couple different things from the turf side. It could be some of our grassy weeds like rough bluegrass and annual bluegrass. They're both pretty shade tolerant, and so if the grass you want is thin, those grasses will go in there and they'll dominate. It could also be an iron deficiency, but we generally see that iron deficiency occur on high pH soils in western Nebraska later in the year when the soils are warm. We don't really see them this time of year very frequently, so I don't think that would be it. And so if I'm just answering the turf side of it, I'm thinking it's probably just something like a rough bluegrass is my best guess because of the shade, and it needs a lot of water, and if it doesn't get the water, it will start to be pretty ugly and die in the summer, but it loves the cool weather, and that's why it's growing in that shaded environment.
All right, and if they sent us a picture, that would help.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, Lauren, so the Twitter question of last week falls to you, and it was kind of a fun one. Last year, my pot-grown tomatoes got a bad black leaf blight. What should I do with the soil? Reuse it, compost it, or throw it away? So our answer from @555 was throw it away. And what is our rotten spot expert going to say about that?
Well, I'm not going to say I disagree with throw it away, because as many of our viewers know, I like to rogue it out, and we can throw soil away the same way. But you could compost that and get it to a point where you would break down the house for that fungus that is causing that blight, or or depending on what the blight was, maybe it was bacterial or maybe it was fungal. But the biggest thing is you don't want to just reuse it, and you want to make sure you're using sanitation. So throw it away is a good answer. I'd agree with it, but if you wanted to save it, you could compost it.
And then they need to sanitize probably the pot too.
Yeah,
if it
that's
had
a
a
good
blight,
point.
they need
Yeah,
to sanitize
yeah.
it.
Excellent.
So washing the
Excellent.
pot out and a little bleach.
Nice.
Good idea.
Additional Twitter or whatever you call it, your retweets.
Yeah. Throw it away though. If you threw the whole thing away, that wouldn't be wrong. There you go.
All right, Elizabeth, this viewer wants to know whether they can use wastewater for watering garden plants and the landscape. They have a couple of examples here. One is the rinse water from dishes, and the other is whether runoff from the roofs and gutters are safe to use on landscape plants.
And we're going to separate the two out. We'll start with what we call the gray water or the rinse water from your dishes and things like that. In Nebraska, it's not legal to use that water, whether you use it in the landscape or in the vegetable garden, so we're not going to apply that to the landscape at all. In other states, it is legal to use, but not in Nebraska. The water from the roofs, like we would collect in a rain barrel or things like that, you can use it in the landscape, but we don't like to recommend that you use it on vegetables, especially the vegetables that come in contact with the soil. So if you're going to overhead irrigate and put that water directly onto the tomato fruit itself, we really don't like to recommend that, or the leafy greens or things like that. It's best to just avoid using it in the garden and just use it on the landscape plants or the turf.
All right, thank you, Elizabeth. Well, before we go to break, we'd like to take a minute to show you what's new out at our garden. We're still not ready to plant much outside, but Nebraska Extension Horticulture Assistant Terry James tells us that our potted plants got some attention in the greenhouse recently.
This week in the Backyard Farmer Garden, we actually started looking at some of the container gardens that we kind of kept over in the greenhouse over the winter. We wanted to make sure that they weren't getting very leggy, there weren't any insects on them, and we kind of started getting them ready to move outside as soon as it warms up. We looked to make sure that they didn't need to be repotted. There were a couple that probably will need to move up in pot size, so we're looking for new pots to move them up into. And we're also going to start kind of hardening them off when the warm weather starts moving in. We're also looking at starting to move some of our cool season crops out into the garden. We're looking at some peas being planted, some onions being planted. We're also looking at the lettuces and the radishes that are in our high tunnel. They're actually looking really well. We're really excited about what's happening in the Backyard Farmer Garden now that it's getting warmer outside. And that's what's happening in the Backyard Farmer Garden this week.
It's time for a short break. Coming up on the show, we'll have Gladys's Plant of the Week and the Lightning Round. Stay tuned for more Backyard Farmer right after these messages. Welcome back to Backyard Farmer. We've got more of your questions to answer, and later in the show we'll be hearing from Lauren about picking out a disease-resistant tree at the garden center. You can still phone in your questions by dialing 1-800-676-5446. While you're doing that, we'll start the lightning round, a minute on the clock, and we are starting with Elizabeth.
Woohoo!
Are you ready?
Yes.
All right, so why exactly can't you use the water off the roof for your vegetables?
You shouldn't use the water off your roof because you think all the critters and the birds and the animals that are on there, and you never know what they could have, and then it sits in that rain barrel. So potential contaminants.
Excellent. Is it okay to plant geraniums and sweet potatoes and things like that outside now?
Not your geraniums. They would get a little toasted by some cold temperatures.
All right. How and when do you divide iris?
Iris, you want to do July and August, and you either want to use a sharp spade or a sharp knife, and go ahead and transplant them at that time.
All right. Can this viewer cut their asters back now, or will the buds be cut off?
You can cut it back now. It still will have time in fall to go ahead and put on that flush of flowers.
All right. When do you dig and divide crowded tulips?
Your tulips, you want to wait for the foliage to fade and turn yellow, and then you want to go ahead and move and transplant them and pull them apart.
All right. When do you prune forsythia?
Forsythia, ideally you want to take a third of the canes out after it flowers because you kind of want to see it flower, and at this point in time it's already flowering, so a little late to prune early.
All right. Excellent. Thank you, Elizabeth. Are you ready, Lauren?
I am ready like my new favorite lunch meat, jalapeno bologna tonight.
Okay. And on that note, is it time for morel mushrooms?
I think we could start seeing them to the southern portion of the state.
All right. This viewer had brown puff balls in their yard last year. Should they expect to see the same thing this year?
Yes.
Is it too late to prune the cankered stems out of red and yellow twig dogwood?
It's never too late to prune those out, so you're getting good growth back.
All right. What is the cause of kind of those water-soaked spots and lettuces in the garden? Do you know?
Some of the water-soaked spots, we can get some bacterial blight or leaf blights and spots in those. So I would just recommend in a garden setting to remove those individual leaves, to just use some sanitation.
Okay. This viewer has tulips that actually have different colors in the petals on them.
Probably indication of a virus. I would rogue it out.
Okay. This one has standing water in the ditch and want to know, are there waterborne diseases they
Absolutely,
should worry
there can be
about?
waterborne diseases. There are Pythiums and Phytophthors that can be in there. Depending on the species in and around the puddle, you may want to manage that.
So I think next time he has a lightning round, I'm just going to be silent and see if he can anticipate the question.
You're hot, Lauren. You're hot.
Are you ready, Bill?
I don't know if I can follow that, but I'll try.
Got it.
We're tied up. We're going to have a tiebreaker around here.
Go for 7.
Okay. This viewer wants to know if it is too early to plant buffalo grass seed.
A little too early. It's warm season grass, so we would like to say in May.
All right. A viewer wants to know whether they can spray dandelions with ammonia to kill them.
No, I wouldn't do that. It's not legal, and nothing we spray is going to work right now. So just pick it with your hand.
All right. Do you have to kill moss before you seed under an old pin oak if there's a lot of it?
If you have a lot of moss under a pin oak, you probably shouldn't be seeding grass because it's probably just going to always fail. And so if you're going to try a tall fescue or fine fescue, but it's probably not going to work.
All right. And if they do want to try it and kill that moss, what should they use?
Roundup.
Okay. What is the active ingredient in Snapshot Pre-Emergent?
Consult your label. I've used it, it works. I just can't want to know this offhand right now.
How do you keep tree seedlings from germinating in the turf?
Mow them?
Is there a pre-emergent for blue grama? Something labeled for it?
I don't know.
He doesn't get that last one.
Yeah, I don't get that
He does
one.
not get the last one.
Almost won.
Okay.
It's a cop-out. Consult your label is a cop-out.
You guys are too much fun tonight. Are you ready, Jim?
Yeah, I think so.
Are there any known borers of oaks that would require somebody to put down a borer drench on their oaks every year?
No, there really isn't. The red oak borer comes out in July, but it's usually not very important.
Okay. Can you purchase or import night crawlers into your yard?
Yes, you can, but if you wait long enough, they'll be there, or you can borrow them from your neighbors. Why purchase?
Okay, so if someone wants to get rid of their night crawlers, how do they do it, or why would they do it?
It's because it's lumpy or something like that, but they're so important as part of the community that's there in the landscape, and so I would say no, don't try to do anything about it.
Okay. This viewer's elm trees were skeletonized last year. What would do that?
Probably the elm leaf flea weevil, and it starts out in the springtime and it gradually gets worse over the season. Hard to control because elms are so big.
All right. When do termites come out?
Now, they'll start swarming, especially when you get a nice warm rain, following a nice warm rain, so look for them.
Okay. What are ants doing when they're like swarming all over on the sidewalk?
They're mating and dispersing, and of course they're hungry too, so they're prowling around looking for sweets and greases and proteins and things to feed on too. Swarming. Did we do 6, 6, 6, 6, 6?
No, I had a 5. So it's like
'cause you got
golf, and I
disqualified.
lost. So,
Oh,
You had a handicap.
it was still really good. You guys are figuring out
good. We're
again that
doing better.
lightning does mean answer those questions
I don't
fast.
know. Bill answered his the most thorough, I thought, except for that one evasive maneuver.
All right, Elizabeth, Gladys has brought us something absolutely gorgeous for Plant of the Week. What did she bring this time around?
She's brought a couple of really fun ones. We'll start up here with a rhododendron. This is PGM, is the cultivar on them. Rhododendrons are evergreen, everbronze, whatever you want to call them. They do keep their foliage throughout the winter, so they can get winter burn or winter desiccation, so you need to be careful so they're not exposed out there. They do prefer acid soils, so that's something to keep in mind. We were talking off air about how we can amend the soil, either by adding acid or peat moss to make it a good environment for them to live in. They have shallow roots, again, consistent, moist soil, so they're kind of touchy on where they want to live, but they are a great one when they do actually bloom, and they're really pretty this year. They're all in bloom now, and so be on the lookout for those. The other one is super cool, just because I like to say the scientific name is Fritillaria. It's also known as the checkered lily or the snakehead lily. It is a bulb, and it is a bulb you plant in the fall. And so that's one of the cool ones on there. It doesn't get very tall, about 12 to 15 inches. It likes that full sun type of an environment, but again, a super fun one. And I just really like to say Fritillaria.
And they are really cool. And even the white one, there's a white one, and the white one even still has checkers on it. Mm-hmm. So thanks to Gladys, as always, for sharing the bounty and the beauty of her garden. Mm-hmm. All right, Jim, you get the next picture question. This is a viewer who found 5 of these little insects at the base of a tree, and she's worried about them. She's worried that they're a problem.
Yeah, no, there's no reason to be worried about those. Those are the Asian multicolored lady beetle, and so you might see some that don't have very strong spots on them, and then some that have lots of heavy spots on them. It's just the variation in that insect. But they're just now coming out, and they're an arboreal forest type of a landscape situation type of a lady beetle, and they're out looking for aphids to feed on. So anytime you find those, they're overwintering somewhere in dense shrubbery or some protective area. Don't do anything about them. Just let them disperse and move out into that landscape. They're going to help you out.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Jim. Bill, we've been getting questions in the last couple of years about wild strawberries in people's turf. Mm-hmm. And this person thinks that what it is, and they think it came from nowhere. They want to know how to control it and when.
yeah, it's going to be a tough one to control, and like a lot of our broadleafs, better to control later in the year with a three-way type of a mix, so you have more active ingredients to help knock it back in multiple applications. But it's going to be a little bit of a challenge to keep that under control.
All right, thank you. Lauren, we have a viewer who has a tomato plant that has been growing in the house for a rather long period of time. Did feed it with 3-year-old composted cow manure. Lights are on about all the time. It's a pretty old plant. It's showing these curling sorts of things going on. It's also not setting fruit. So his question is, what's going on with this particular tomato?
There's a couple things that could be going on. So one thing I would look at is where the composted manure, if there's any possibility of any herbicide contamination in that manure or that compost. Some of the herbicides can even carry over from what the animals were eating, through. So just be cautious of that. The other thing is tomatoes are excellent identifiers of any type of drift. So this time of year, if someone did a a yard spray and the windows were open, even if it was in the house, you could have that type of a response because it looks like a growth regulator type of injury. The other thing that it could be is a virus. So if the plant was healthy though, and then just all of a sudden the majority of the plant became shoestring leaves and curled like that, I'm going to go with some sort of a growth regulator herbicide injury on that. It should grow out of it, but I would maintain it, and then hopefully it would, set fruit after it gets through the stress period with the herbicide.
Okay, and that it's hard to get tomatoes to fruit in the house with that light. I mean, that's another tricky thing. So
you transplant it, hopefully it'll be good
ready
shape.
to roll. Excellent. All right, Elizabeth, this is a viewer who actually went to a pruning seminar. We talked about pruning out a double leader in a spruce, and looky there. From Kearney, she wants to know how to do this. Get rid of the weaker one and split the other is really what we said. Can you talk a little bit about that?
And I'm a very visual person, so I have my little demonstration when it comes to the centralized leader. But what you want to do is you want to take one of those forks and you want to what we call subordinate. So you want to cut one of those so that way this one becomes the main leader. If possible, and you can look and see where that union is at, where those branches meet, you can take a look and see if you're removing too much if you were to take that one out instead of subordinate. But that's what we would do, is just take part of that one off, so you'd have one central leader that would then take over.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Elizabeth. It's a lot of fun to head over to the garden center and pick out a new tree. But beware, you're going to want to get a good selection that's able to withstand the onslaught of diseases that will attack soon after it's planted in your backyard. Our Rots and Spots guy, Lauren Giesler, tells us to make sure disease resistance is at the top of your priority list when you're picking out a tree.
It's the perfect time of year to start establishing some new trees in your landscape, but one of the things that I look at as a plant pathologist are some of our common disease problems that we have that can affect some of our trees, and just by some simple selection you can avoid a lot of problems in the future as that tree gets established. So when we're looking at things like flowering crab apples or particularly like apple trees or fruit trees, it's very important to look for those common diseases that we have and some sort of resistance to them. So just for example, with our flowering crab apples, we commonly have scab every year in Nebraska. So make sure you're selecting those cultivars that have good tolerance or resistance to scab. Another one that we see those also in our fruit trees. We're going to see things like fire blight that can affect apple trees. And even some of our selections where we look at even some of the flowering pears, for example, we can see fire blight in those. So that's another one to look for some resistance to. Also, when we're looking at our fruit trees, especially when we're looking at some of the rust diseases. So cedar apple rust, very common in Nebraska. So make sure you're selecting a apple cultivar that has resistance to rust. The other thing that we look at when we're trying to position these trees in the landscape is where are they at in reference to other possible hosts for some of those diseases, particularly our rust diseases. So we know that if we put a juniper, for example, close proximity to an apple tree that's susceptible to cedar apple rust, that's going to create an environment that's significant for common disease that's going to occur very frequently. So just make sure that you're positioning those types of trees in your landscape correctly and making sure you have some resistance, particularly to the flowering crabs, the apple trees, and then we're going to talk next a little bit about some of our evergreen species. Now when we're looking at evergreen species and trying to evaluate those for potential problems in the future, there's a few common diseases that we want to avoid. Particularly with our spruce, for example, we'll see Rhizosphaera needlecast. I know on the entomology side they can see some spider mite issues as well. So make sure that you're positioning those trees appropriately and you're picking maybe out of the categories of spruce some that are less susceptible. Another example of a common evergreen disease that we would see in Nebraska is pine wilt. So at this point, we really don't recommend planting Scotch pine, for example, for a long-term tree in the landscape. If you're looking for something for maybe a 10-year window, that's going to be fine, but I wouldn't recommend any Scotch pine if you're looking at more of an extended period or wanting a large tree out of that. Now, some of the other common ones that we see, you know, some of our other juniper species, when we're looking at white pine, that can be a fairly sensitive species, and we can see some problems with that. So you want to be careful on positioning with that tree. And then also some of your other evergreens, even some of your juniper species, we can see some common diseases, and like I mentioned earlier, we can see that cycle with cedar apple rust, so avoiding those junipers, you know, in close proximity to any of your fruit trees that are susceptible to rust. So just overall, if you're looking at your tree species, when you're looking at establishment, and trying to make sure that you're making those selections so you can avoid significant disease problems in the future, and make sure that you've got species that are giving you that great aesthetic value that you're looking for.
In some cases, the trees you want to plant can be on the expensive side. So you're going to want to bring home not only the most aesthetically pleasing tree you can find, but one that will have the traits to resist those diseases that Lauren talked about. So we don't want to bring home something that's going to be a problem in the landscape.
Well, that's right. And there's a lot of other things that can affect trees as well. So just, you know, make sure you're using that as one of the criteria in your decision.
Perfect. All right, Jim, you get the next picture question. This is a viewer in Omaha, and they woke 2,000.
It's a ruler.
Thousands of these larvae under their huge elm tree in Omaha.
Oh, that's much better.
And there weren't any beyond the drip line. And the next day there was a new but smaller batch. What are they, and should they be concerned?
No concern. This happens every once in a while. In the early spring, we have two trees that flower early, and usually the maples, like silver maple, and also elms. And this actually happens to be a gall gnat that infests the seed or the flowers early in the season when it's still cool, and we're still thinking it's cold, and you know, we're not even going to get out in the landscape, and they're up there doing their job already, working on the developing flowers and seeds, and so they reach maturity already, and here they rain down to fall down to the soil so they can pupate in the soil, and so you know, it's kind of one of those dry rains. It's not very fruitful, but just sweep them out and then you're okay, because that will pass.
I don't know that raining larva is going to be something that tourism is going to like for the state. All right, Bill. This is a steep berm, kind of up one side, down the other, against a parking lot, too much shade, and a lot of plant material.
Yep.
Their question is, what is the degree of slope that we usually talk about for being mowable, and what would you do here with turf?
Well, you know, there's a lot of things going on here. Just from the slope perspective, you know, 15% slope is pretty steep. And turf is great because it can stabilize the soil, and so it helps to prevent runoff and erosion and that type of thing. But there's always that question about maintenance. So if it's much steeper than that, you know, you can go with a fescue, a fine fescue that can help stabilize that slope. But yeah, I wouldn't want to mow it if it's much more than 15 to 20 degrees. And then that picture, I mean, I'm sure you have heat and drought and shade and compaction and road salt. And so there's a situation where you think, can I do mulching there? Can I do something else that's not a turf grass? Because grass needs sunlight and it needs water to survive. So it's not going to do it there.
All right, thank you, Bill. Lauren, we have a viewer who sent in a picture of this orange fungus on a big old hackberry stump. And they want to know what that is. They think it's really kind of pretty.
Orange fungus on a hackberry stump.
Yeah.
Okay, if it has, trying to see, I guess I'd want to know on that one if it's kind of rubbery or hard or soft. And then if it has individual stems, if it's coming out from the base, I can't really tell from the picture. There are some kind of reddish orange fungi that are in the genus Flammulina that are common on a lot of stumps. So that would be one idea. But in general, again, I don't recommend keeping, if you don't know what it is and there's a question and you have pets or small children and it's a soft fleshy fungus, I would remove it from the landscape just for safety. If that's not an issue and enjoy the beauty, just enjoy it and go along.
All right, thank you.
It's probably breaking down the stump.
Okay, excellent. Elizabeth, this is a viewer who actually contacted us through Facebook, and they have rhubarb plants. They have two of them. One seems healthy. The other one they think is going to seed already. They want to know what's going on with that plant and are they going to be able to harvest it or what in the world?
that is going to seed. That's the flower structure. Most of the time we just say pull the flower structure out and don't let it go to seed. The bigger question would be, what is the overall health of that plant look like that it's going to seed that much earlier than the other one? So, you know, are we having the leaves looking the same size? Is the overall health and, you know, the question? So the easy answer is to pull the seed stalk out. The other one is to check the overall health and quality of that other one, that compare the two plants and check on that. That's going to be your best bet.
All right, thank you, Elizabeth. Well, it is time for our Twitter question of the week. So we will have one. You can tweet the answer. This is an evergreen, and the question is, what is wrong? Is this winter damage or is this disease? So tweet your answer at BYFUNL, and next week we will throw it to some unsuspecting panelist and see whether that panelist is going to answer it better than you did. So we have some announcements. Maxwell Arboretum, the first Tuesday's walking tours are still going on. Noon to 1 p.m., Carl Lurch Gazebo, unlgardens.unl.edu. Great things to see. Vegetable gardening workshops. Hall County Extension, Elizabeth and O'Neill, and we have a couple of numbers on the screen and also the URL for the website on those particular things. And I believe we have a third one, which is attracting beneficial insects, predators, parasitoids, and pollinators, this Saturday, the 18th, at Glacier Creek Preserve. So lots of fun stuff in the gardening world. All right, so we have questions going on. This is a fun one, Jim. This is a Waverly viewer that puts out jelly for the Baltimore Orioles, and the bees come. How does he keep the bees away from the jelly instead of getting the Orioles, or is it a losing battle?
It pretty much is. I mean, you can try to offer alternatives, you know, maybe set more out than you normally would. The bees right now, I'm assuming probably honeybees that are probably very hungry, at least for the carbohydrates. That's the only thing I can think of is some alternative, or just many feeding stations and the like. And find out just where, if it's a beehive, you just find out how far away it is. But eventually when things come into flowering, those resources will be much more overpowering in terms of the bees going out to forage on those than the jelly.
All right, thank you, Jim. Bill, this is an Omaha viewer. They want to know if you can use preen on an asparagus bed that's just coming up. And your partner in crime down there is saying no, just in case you don't know that.
Yeah, I'm not as familiar with the preen on asparagus, but
It's not on the label.
yeah.
Strawberries and asparagus are not on the label for that pre-emergent.
All right, so if you're trying to keep those grassy weeds out of your asparagus bed at your new house, don't do that.
Oh, well, I'll try to do that. Not to do that.
Okay. Lauren, we have a viewer who has been trying to grow zucchini, melons, and cukes for 4 years now. Every year it's the same thing. The plants start out great, plants them in mounds, fertilizes them, sprays them with carbaryl. They all flower, they turn into what they should be, apparently. Then they get little brown spots under the leaves turn yellow, the plants croak.
Okay.
And this is on the far side of Council Bluffs, so I don't know whether that's the Iowa side or the Nebraska side, but no pictures.
Okay, so it's kind of hard. There are some different foliar diseases of cucurbits that would go across things, powdery mildew, some anthracnose diseases that could be residue borne. So one of the things I'm going to encourage is sanitation, and then if they're not, use a good straw mulch, something to keep that soil covered once those plants are established. And then finally, avoid any overhead irrigation. If you're doing all that, please check back and maybe send a picture when you have a problem, and we can kind of go from there.
All right, thanks, Lauren. Elizabeth, this is a Mason City viewer that has tomato hybrids, kind of on an old feedlot, grows great corn and peppers. Can't grow tomatoes. The soil test shows high phosphorus, 600 ppt, parts per million. Anything that you know of that will neutralize phosphorus in an old feedlot?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, so that would be a raised bed situation.
A raised
with
bed
the
situation.
tomatoes.
You know, I take a look at soluble salts too, because sometimes that can be fairly high within the feedlot situation too.
Okay.
You know, if they want to try to amend it with some different type of organic matter, or some other soil to see if that would make a difference. But maybe possibly, like you said, a raised bed would be the best bet.
All right. Jim, we have about a minute. Fred talked about bagworms last week.
Yes.
This particular viewer thinks that the bags are at the very top of a 20-foot spruce and obviously can't pick them off. Is there anything to spray at that distance, and when would they do that?
Well, you know, if you have a hose end sprayer to put your material in and spray with a powerful force, you can get it up there. And, you know, when they hatch out in very late May or early June, and so they're very small, tiny caterpillars, are very susceptible to any kind of a spray. And so I would suggest anything like an insecticidal soap would work. You just really soak it up well and good, and or if you have to, an insecticide. But I don't see why you'd have to use a chemical kind of insecticide in a case like this.
All right, thanks, Jim. We have about 30 seconds, Bill.
Be
This is a
brief.
viewer who had clover take over in the backyard. How do you control clover in the backyard?
Clover is generally a sign, again, of mismanagement. So there's probably not enough fertilizer going down on the lawn, so it's thin. We want to increase our estrogen fertilization to get a strong, dense canopy, and then it'd be spray in the fall with a Trimec product. Triclopyr is also a good way to knock it down.
All right, or enjoy it and get those bees.
Enjoy that too.
You know, we'd like to take a brief moment at the end of our show to say goodbye to a friend and colleague, Adrian Fiala. He was a large part of NET broadcasts throughout the years, and we will really deeply miss his contributions. All right. Unfortunately, that is also all the time we have for Backyard Farmer. We do want to say thanks to our panel for another great show, and to everybody who submitted questions and pictures. Helping us on the phones tonight, we had Master Gardeners Gladys Jurink, George Edgar, Kit Diamond, Bertine Loop, Kathy French, and Nebraska Extension Horticulture Assistant Terry James. Next time on Backyard Farmer, we'll see what improperly storing your potatoes will do to your dinner plans. Amy Timmerman gives us some good tips to avoid rotting. We'll also feature a home setup with an aquaponics growing system. So, good night, good gardening, and we'll see you all next week right here on Backyard Farmer.